Well, welcome, Amanda. Thanks for joining me today.
Of course.
Um, yeah, just to set the stage for what we're looking to do today, I'd like to learn more about you, and more about your book, Program 38 Sparks, and more about your writing process. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thanks.
Cool. All right, let's start with something a little fun. What's a random fact that readers might not know about you and it isn't in your bio?
Well, I don't know. There's a lot of random things about me. I'm actually like a really big Pokemon fan. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but like if you look behind me on my shelf, I have like a Piplup collection. It's like the cult of Piplup back there. So yeah, I'm a really big
Nice.
Pokemon fan.
That's awesome. What's your favorite Pokemon?
It's actually not Piplup. My favorite Pokemon is Breloom.
Oh, okay. Nice. I'm a sucker for the OG Pokemon personally. Um, Squirtle is my go-to from way back yonder.
Squirtle's pretty cool.
Indeed. Yeah, so I was watching some of the interviews that you were doing, specifically the one with the horror connection. And you mentioned that your favorite superhero would be Doctor Strange, followed by Scarlet Witch. The thing I was curious about is what about them kind of pulls them as the favorites in your mind?
So as far as Doctor Strange is concerned, it's more about the character. Like I love Stephen Strange. I love Benedict Cumberbatch. I just feel like it was a match made in heaven. I love the idea of the Ancient One and the Sanctum Sanctorum. I like to write things that are similar to that. My other book, Book of Viceroy, is kind of in the same vein. But yeah, that would be why it would be Doctor Strange. As far as the Scarlet Witch slash Wanda is concerned, she's really powerful. And like when you go and look at her history and her lore and all the crazy things she could do, I would be like, man, I want to write a character like that. And 38 doesn't really have a character that's super like the Scarlet Witch, so I'm always just in awe of like how they managed to make her do more and more insane things as her mental health starts to deteriorate.
Indeed. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I feel like I did see some parallels between Kelsey and Scarlet Witch, although there's obviously like the differences. So it's interesting that you mentioned that you feel like there's no direct parallel.
Well, Kelsey doesn't really have power to that extent. That is, she has similar like mental health up and down, but she doesn't have like the same level of power. Like the worst Kelsey can do is accidentally stab you. The worst Scarlet Witch can do is literally like write you out of existence.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's interesting to watch those movies and the TV shows and see how her power progresses from kind of growing into that power and how that happens. So yeah, definitely solid choice.
She goes from like barely knowing how to use her powers in Age of Ultron and then becoming an Avenger and then becoming one of the most powerful entities in the multiverse. It's just like a really powerful and solid transformation that the MCU actually carries throughout its plotline, which we don't get to see a lot of the like MCU characters really evolve from one state to another. I feel they're just kind of stagnated in their character once they have their individual movie, if they're lucky enough to have one, and then you just kind of carry through with the same person. Like the only other character I could think of that had like progressive character development was Iron Man, but beyond that, they seem pretty stagnated to me. And Loki, but isolated to his show.
Yeah,
I also really
yeah,
like Loki.
definitely. Yeah, that's a good one. Especially like season two. No spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but man, season two is so good. And like you say, like the character progression of like where he started in the movies and then to where he ended up in the show is like, oh my gosh, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm not a particularly big fan of when it comes to that specific character, though, is that it's like I feel like everyone forgets that the Loki that's in Loki isn't the Loki that is in the movies, which I think is weird because it's like from beginning to end, look at how much he's grown. And I'm like, okay, but like, gotta realize we have two different characters in there who look identical, and thus sometimes we forget they're two different people. So
Hmm.
that was my only gripe with it.
That's interesting. So you're saying that there's a difference between the like there's two different Lokis? I guess I didn't catch that.
So yeah, the first Loki bites the dust, for lack of a better expression, in the beginning of Infinity War when they're on the ship. But then when you start Loki season one, it's actually Loki from 2012 and the Avengers from an alternative version of the timeline who ends up
That's
getting pruned
right.
out of it. So when Loki has this big character development, it's like, look at how far he came. And I'm like, you missed a bunch of steps in the middle to get him from Avengers point to where he ultimately ends up, which I won't spoil because it's amazing. But at the same time, everyone's like, look at the character development. And I'm like, yes, but you're looking at two different characters. They're just look identical. So it's very much difficult to tell that they're different people.
Huh. That's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought about that recently.
I think about this kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I imagine so because you've definitely been working in the superhero space for a little bit now. Although you mentioned that it wasn't necessarily your first choice. It sounded like it kind of grew out of I think it was a friend of yours named Alex that
Yes.
kind of was the kickoff point for you getting into the hero writing. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's definitely the answer. It's what I told Chris when I was on last week, and I still stand by that because I mean I liked the MCU. I watched it like as a casual fan before I even started Program 38, but I was never like super into superheroes. It was more of like a casual thing. And then Alex was like, "Oh yeah, you should do this. This will be cool." And I was like, "Okay." I actually normally write magical realism, so I mean, it kind of fits in the same genre, and it didn't really feel hard to switch over. And my next series is also magical realism slash fantasy, so I mean, I didn't run away from it entirely, but yeah, I did start it because of my friend Alex. It was great.
That's awesome. So yeah, I guess you mentioned magical realism is the other project you're working on. Where would you say that you get your inspiration? Like where do you feel like the driving force for picking a genre comes from? Do you feel like it's something that naturally comes out of as you explore writing, or is it something you're like, oh no, I want to develop into this specific area?
I think a lot of it for me was like the media I consumed as a child and just as a teenager in general. I love Undertale. I loved Miraculous Ladybug. I loved Gravity Falls and the Owl House. And I feel like a lot of those fantastical, magical worlds influenced me into becoming more of a fiction writer than anything else. And a lot of the mediums I just listed tend to fall into magical realism, with Gravity Falls having the monsters, with the Owl House literally having magic, with Miraculous Ladybug may having magical superheroes. A lot of the things that I grew up with was that. So I feel like I drew a lot of inspiration from those places and then carried them forward. Like I even Undertale in a way kind of falls under magical realism because that's monsters and magic, and that's a lot of the stuff that I loved, and I feel like I carry a little bit of all of them into my work.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and you yeah, in one of your interviews, I forget which one, you mentioned that you recently moved to New England. Is that correct, or is it not so recent that at this point?
That's actually incorrect because I'm actually back where I actually live like in the Pennsylvania, Maryland area. That's where I grew up. I am back there now. I lived in New England in Massachusetts in Springfield for about 3 years while I was attending college at Western New England University. So that's where I got the inspiration for Sherman being in New England because I attended college in New England and looked at a lot of colleges in New England.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, yeah, and you touched on how you know growing up you're watching these different TV shows. Do you feel like there's any other part of your upbringing or your experience in high school and college that you tended to try and bring into the story, or that you feel like influenced like the major themes?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. That's a great question. I was actually very, very much bullied throughout high school and the early beginnings of college. I did not really fit in because I was kind of loud and always kind of liked to be not the center of attention necessarily, but my personality could fill up a room sometimes. And I didn't really know A, how to like stop that, and B, how to like find the people that liked me. But then over time, I ultimately found a bunch of really cool and good people that liked me as I was. So that's kind of how 38 came into being. One of those people being Alex, obviously, because he made it happen. But quite a few others along the way inspired these characters and really brought them to life by just showing me basic human kindness, which sounds sad, but unfortunately in these cases is true because, like, when you go through high school, and no one, like, I wasn't even necessarily bullied in the traditional way, like being pushed into lockers or being called names. I just got to a point where we got to high school and like everyone, and I mean everyone from my class just ignored me. It was like I didn't exist. So it was very hard to navigate high school. And I think the only reason I did was because I had one very kind teacher who always let me eat lunch with them. So I ended up, so I ended up coming out okay because of that. He's a wonderful man. But it was definitely one of the major drivers for the themes was just my experiences of feeling alone and how a lot of people do tend to find their closer friends in college and the people who stick by their side in college. And I can gladly say that I found a bunch of them.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah, no, I definitely feel that coming through your work. And one of the things I actually enjoyed was how well I felt like you wrote the characters' experiences, and it wasn't like I don't know, like a two-dimensional or like really basic surface level stuff. Like you dealt with some really heavy subjects, in my opinion. Some of the characters being, going through fairly challenging emotions. So, how do you feel about writing those scenes? Like, how do you prepare yourself? Because, like you mentioned, some of these experiences are coming out of your own personal experience. How do you go about writing that? Like, what's the process of getting into that space and getting out of that space?
It's very strange because it depends on the circumstance. As far as this particular book is like concerned, I wrote most of it while still actually at college. I wrote it my sophomore year of college and then went back and revisited it to edit it and published it my senior year. So I was very much writing it while in that space. So it wasn't necessarily as challenging to navigate in and out of those feelings as it would normally be when you're writing a story because I was currently living them and I felt like I couldn't necessarily escape them, so I almost sort of used it as like a coping mechanism of like, if Kelsey and Jay and Nicole and Wyatt can like figure out their problems, maybe I can too. And I found that it was very cathartic and very useful for getting some of those excess emotions out. And usually after writing it, I did feel a lot better. And that's true of most of the Program 38 books. So,
Hmm. Yeah, no, I can definitely resonate with that. Being a writer myself, of um, having those vibes, and then the process of writing it out actually helps in that cathartic process. Um, yeah, thanks for sharing that.
of
I
course.
guess a more basic question is why writing? So you've talked about like why you like to write in this specific space, some of the things about how you tend to write, but what about writing drew you in? Like, how did you get into it?
So that's actually an interesting question because, frankly, I don't even quite know the answer to it. I mean, I was, as I said, I was bullied pretty badly in middle school, and I started writing pretty credibly in middle school, as we all do. And I was told by a teacher in middle school that my writing was crap and that I should consider expanding into a different genre and just generally not being a writer at all. And I was like, okay, bet I'm just going to do it, but better now. So I feel like part of the reason I continued on with it as long as I did was just so I could prove to myself that I had the ability to do it, that I would rise above the adversity there, and that, like, just generally speaking, I could do it. But then as I got into like high school and college, I realized like I couldn't imagine myself without it for some reason. It was just so ingrained in me at that point that there was just really no Amanda Madison without being an author. So it just kind of felt like a natural like course of action for me to then become a creative writing major in college, then, write Program 38 and release it to everyone. And that's just sort of how I ended up here. It just felt right.
It's actually interesting because you mentioned there's a few teachers that you had positive experiences, and I can actually see some of those parallels as I read through the book. Now that you're talking about it, I can reimagine those scenes that you wrote, and I can picture that now, which is which is interesting. One offhand question is. One of the characters has a specific subject. I don't know if it's spoiler or not, but mathematics specifically.
Oh, we could
That
talk about that.
is
That's fine.
okay. Fair enough. Is this speaking from personal experience, or is this just happen to pick a random subject there?
No, Kelsey is extremely bad at calculus. Fun fact, I never took calculus because I knew this about myself. But I actually, when I went to my college, tested into calculus and I was like, no. So I was good enough at math to like get through it in high school, but then when it came to like trying to get it in college, I was just like, no. So I was just I felt like Kelsey having like one real struggle from college compared to all the superhero nonsense she deals with later kind of just would balance things out better because not only was she dealing with struggling with math and then later struggling in journalism, she was also dealing with, being a superhero and the weights and the responsibilities that come with being Spark, which I'm fine with telling. She's trying to figure it all out and just navigate it all. But not only does she have to figure out how to be Spark and how to deal with the consequences of her, I'll just leave it at actions. She's also trying to figure out how to, not fail calculus, which she narrowly passes, and then figure out how to not flip off her journalism teacher, which she also very narrowly passes. So yes, both of those storylines do come from specific experiences. For me, in math, it was in high school, and for journalism, it was in college. But yeah, I definitely struggled with those two particular subjects, and I tried to carry over like the person that Jay's very loosely based off of is like a whiz at math, so Jay like kind of helping her out with that, and Wyatt being an engineer in real life, as Alex has already disclosed. It just kind of made sense for them to be there to support her and to help her. And I just thought it was another non-superhero way to show like the found family aspects.
Hmm. Yeah, I dig that, and I can definitely feel it. I can empathize with Kelsey as she's going through those experiences, and like, another strong point for the book, in my opinion, is like you really feel like what these characters are feeling, and you can empathize with it. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I understand what you're feeling, and it's like if I was in that situation, I feel like I would do fairly similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, I like that too. I think that's usually the strongest point of my writing is usually my characters. I feel very close to all of them, and I feel like I do a fairly good job writing them and just really ironing out their experiences. Sometimes I struggle when it's something that's not as close to home, but that's with everything. So I think that it was just, I think it's good. I think having characters that you're not particularly like in the experience of can also be good. So I'm fairly happy with what I accomplished.
Indeed, yeah, and you should be. One of the parallels he drew in one of your interviews was talking about a parallel between some of the relationships and Percy Jackson. What would you say would be some other either books, movies, media that you feel like inspired the work?
Um, some people have told me it's very similar to Wednesday, and I've seen it, and I would agree with that for the most part. I didn't like write it with Wednesday in mind, but they definitely have sort of like that similar relationship. Like Kelsey can very much be similar to Wednesday at points and constantly need the help of several Enids to get her out of her situation. There's really no one in the book that's like as bubbly and perky as Enid, I would say, except maybe the character that joins their team a little later in the book. But she it's kind of a similar dynamic, similar layout kind of deal. As far as like other media that's similar, I try to keep it away from being super similar to a bunch of other media. So I don't want to sit here and be like, it's like Harry Potter, and Percy Jackson, because like I don't really know how to best explain it. It's more so like like Program 30 to me is more like a feeling and like something that's different enough that like a lot of people can enjoy it, that like similar things, but also it's a little too different in the sense that I can't be like, what else can I compare it to? Like the only book that I could think of off the top of my head that definitively would be similar to it is Random Man, but by A.R. Maxwell. But we both published them around the same time, so that was entirely I just started reading it 2 days ago, so I had no like there was no like in cahootsness there about it. It was just sort of like, oh yeah, these are similar. So like that's like the only thing that's coming to mind off the top of my head. But like a lot of those like struggling through college or high school type shows, like Phineas and Ferb has a little bit of this in there somewhere, and Milo Murphy's Law has a lot of similarities. I'm just trying to think because like superheroes wise, you could just say like the MCU, but like I feel like that doesn't capture the whole college struggles bit. And then you could say something like Milo Murphy's Law or Wednesday or something like that to get the college end of it, but then you miss the superheroes aspect. There's not really one that I feel merges them both. A lot of people tell me it's similar to Sky High, but I haven't seen that in many, many years. I saw it as a very little kid and don't remember it now. So,
Hmm.
Sorry
Yeah,
for the
that's
tangent.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, no, that's a good call out. Yeah, I remember seeing Sky High a long time ago as well. But to your point, I feel like reading the book, I was, there's always that part of my brain that's trying to figure out, oh, what is this like? What is she potentially pulling from? But the thing that I found interesting was, I couldn't really draw parallels, like you say. There's certain aspects I could say, okay, maybe this bit is similar to something else. But I feel like the story was very unique. Like that everything that happened as it progressed was surprising in a way of like, oh, okay, I didn't see that coming. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay, that's what's happening now. Okay, wow, cool. So definitely props to you on that front. Um,
Thank you.
what let's talking specifically about Kelsey. I guess I don't want to go into spoiler territory too much, but what would you say is the inspiration for her powers? Because I feel like her powers were the most unique. Like I feel like I haven't seen that specific set of powers before in a superhero. Although to be fair, I haven't read like every single Marvel comic in existence. But yeah, can you speak a bit to
So I'll do the spoiling for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Kelsey's ability
that?
is manipulating shield, for the most part. Going any further than calling it that would probably be spoilers, but I feel like the base idea of it came from Doctor Strange because he tends to use those little circular shields a lot on his like himself, even though his powers diverge quite a bit from doing that. That's like sort of where the basis of the powers came from. And her powers are also very driven by her emotions. So her shield will A, change color, and B, change shape pretty dramatically based on how she feels. Like, if she's in a good shipper, I'm going to protect people mode. They're just normal circular fields and they're peaceful and such. And then when she's angry, they're big, giant red razors that go in all sorts of different directions and end up causing all sorts of chaos and problems. Which is why Kelsey doesn't even want to admit she has powers in the first place half the time because it's like, oh my god, there's red shields going everywhere. What have I done? Yeah, so uh, I feel like a lot of it came from well Doctor Strange, but also like being a college student, and this goes for most of the superheroes actually because you'll see this with Jay later. But there's more of like a dealing with your emotions and like the high intensity and high pressure, and I feel like it needed to show through their powers because like a lot of the characters that are more sensible and more calm and more collected, like Comet slash Wyatt, have much better control over the powers. But then you have Kelsey, who very much doesn't because A, she doesn't want to embrace them, and B, she doesn't really know how to. She's never had a mentor in that regard. So it's how her powers end up manifesting and changing. And as she gets further through the book, she tries to figure out how to control it, and she does a lot better with it. And it's just sort of symbolic of her transformation. But yeah, I did find them fairly unique because a lot of people don't take shields and then try to apply like an offensive measure to it because like, a razor shield would kind of be ineffective in a situation where like you're just solely doing like defensive. But like if you need to both shield yourself and, pierce your enemy while you're at it, it's also very good to like have giant spikes on your shield.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I definitely saw that of how it was like you saw like the basis of the power, but then there's the application of the power. That yeah, there's definitely a number of ways, and I won't go into the details. Definitely, people should read it. But there's definitely interesting ways where it's like, huh, that's a good point. I would never have thought of applying in that sense. One of the other things I thought you did that was interesting, and I feel like I haven't seen this that much recently, is you touched on the pandemic. How did that impact your writing? Like, so where were you during the pandemic, and how did that impact your writing? Because it definitely played a part several moments in the story.
So it was actually my senior year of high school when the pandemic rolled in at first, and it resulted in me, like, well, actually, it was my junior year of high school, but it resulted in me losing a good portion of my senior year of high school, and it developed some, being locked inside for a while makes you go a little crazy. So it definitely kind of played into Kelsey's whole like fear of things, both herself and otherwise, because she was locked in with her parents for so long, even though they were hardly around because they don't believe in COVID. But it just sort of played into that like agoraphobic kind of very closed off feeling that Kelsey has. But also for my real life, I was stuck. I live in like deep, deep woods. There's not a lot around me. So it was just sort of like you were stuck with your family and with yourself for way too long. And I feel like that definitely carried over into the book and into my first year of college as well, because our first year of college, we had to wear masks all the time. We had to very much, keep our guard up. I ended up getting COVID 4 times at college, so tell me about it. But it's just, yeah, it's just, I felt like a lot of people that write about like this current time just kind of completely neglect it, despite the fun and interesting challenges that like a post-COVID world can bring to a story. I mean, bigger events in the series ultimately end up overshadowing COVID. It's like basically it becomes a cakewalk, but for Kelsey at the beginning of her journey, it's sort of like her biggest problem because she's been working in this store while COVID's been going on, so it's been kind of torture for her. She's trying to navigate college with COVID protocols still in, which is something I had to deal with, and it's just sort of a mess. I mean, Sherman sort of negates this by having, like, I guess, a Deus Machina, where it's like, oh, we have a student that can control it, kind of thing. And then when that student goes away, it's like, hi, we have a problem now. So it was just sort of like, I feel like a lot of people just don't do that. As you said, it was a very strange thing to have in a modern piece of writing, but I also feel like it's important to talk about because there's a lot of social implications that COVID ends up having that affects this period of time. And I'm a history minor, so I felt like I had to kind of incorporate the true history of things into the novel so that it would just stay cohesive. Because, like, if Kelsey was afraid of being near people and just generally, additionally, agoraphobic and claustrophobic, more so than like normal, it would be weird for it to be that way without COVID. So it just sort of naturally lended its way into Kelsey's character. It doesn't impact the other characters, I would say, as much. I feel like Wyatt does not care about it at all. I feel like Jay does care, but he's so isolated within himself at this point that it's not a problem. And I feel like Nicole and where she's from, there's sort of a culture of ignoring it because we still have work to get done. And there gets in, the Hollywood / acting realm, as we know because it's our past, but for their future is going to hit a lot of trouble because of the actors and writers strike. So
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and I would say I appreciated seeing it because, like you say, is it's an important subject, and it's being that there's the realism aspect of your book. It's a thing that happened, and it affected people in a bunch of different ways. So I appreciated that you did that, and it was interesting to see how it impacted people in that setting. And I feel like more books should do it. I don't, not to the point of like where it's like zombie movies where everything's a zombie movie or whatever.
yeah.
But I think it definitely was something that was a substantial part of the human existence to then play a part in magical realism.
Well, yeah, I specified in American history, but my minor was generally history. So yeah, I actually minored in history and public relations, but generally speaking, for the question you asked, only the history one kind of applied. So I felt like it was very important to try and keep the history like factually accurate. And the next couple books will do that. For reasons I don't want to totally spoil, there's going to be like a complete split off. It has to do with a prophecy that's in the beginning of this book and sort of carries on throughout the rest of the series as sort of like an ongoing arc. But beyond the whole, giant colossal battle that might or might not occur, there's really not a lot of reason to deviate from what is going on in real life history because they're not making much of an impact outside of Sherman University or their general area of Lapis / Massachusetts just yet. So I try to be factual and accurate when it comes to those things because it impacts the characters and how they feel.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I could definitely get that vibe. Um, just shifting gears here a little bit. I actually have the book here in front of me because it's really fun to look at, and it also feels really good. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's like it's got a really nice texture to it. It's like an
It
ASMR.
does.
I don't know if I can translate that through a microphone. Um, yeah, I just wanted to take a quick segue and talk about the cover art because I was looking through some of the notes and you mentioned that a Marvel artist actually did the cover art for it. Can you talk a bit about how that came about?
Yes, I can. The cover artist is actually named Gus Malk. I know Gus for a pretty long time at this point. I ran into him a couple times on the convention circuit. He also worked with my dad on one of his movie posters. My dad is a film director. And just as an aside, that still kind of answers your question, Gus Malk is like one of the nicest people you could possibly meet. He is like an absolute sweetheart. He is just so nice and easy to work with, and it was just such a nice experience. It came about because I was looking for an artist, and I was like, well, shoot, I feel like a lot of covers nowadays are very samey. And as I was looking into like cover art for Program 38, I was like, I want it to really stand out. Like, even if it doesn't fit the traditional norms and conventions of how it works, I want it to really stand out. And I was like, well, you know, Marvel, DC, all of those comic books and the movies really influenced the superhero genre as a whole, and myself. And I was like, maybe I should probably lean Program 38's covers and like their general style of artwork more towards this like semi-realistic comic kind of style artwork. So when I was going through like my list of contacts and people that I knew, I was like, Gus has worked for Marvel, and Gus is just generally wonderful and easy to work with. I should contact Gus and see if he'd be interested. And he was more than interested. He was super, as I said, wonderful to work with. And the cover came out fantastic. And he is he's an inker and a sketch artist, I believe. You should check out Gus's work. Like, sorry for the aside, but he primarily works in pencils and charcoals and stuff. And like, his work is so good that you could think you're looking at a photograph. Like, you could be easily convinced it's either a photograph or AI. He's just amazing. And the colorist on the piece is actually named Ezekiel. His signature's actually on the cover. So, yeah. So it was a tag team effort between Gus and Ezekiel, but they both did an absolutely phenomenal job. And I'm so blessed to have them on board. And I feel like it's one of the biggest draws of the book. I mean, besides the writing being good and the characters being strong, I feel like just it's a nice piece of self candy. Like, it's just nice to look at. So I gotta get up to Canada and sign your book, though.
Yeah, or vice versa. I'll come down. Um, you're actually not that far where you're at, because I'm in Manitoba, Canada. For those who are watching, it's
I
kind of
for some
like
reason thought you were in
central
Quebec.
left. It's close.
Is it on
But
the other side of the country?
well, Manitoba is kind of like the dead center. Actually, fun fact: there's what is it? The actual longitudinal center of Canada is in the same province that I'm in. So technically
Wow.
speaking, it is actually the center of Canada. Although people tend to think of Ontario as the center of Canada because it's where a lot of people live. But I digress.
Yeah, because I'm closer to like Ontario and Toronto. Like, I go up for Niagara Falls for vacation. By the way, gorgeous, but I'm sure you know that.
Indeed. Indeed. So I feel like we haven't really talked about the book specifically in terms of what it's about. Can you tell me a bit about the story as if I haven't read it?
My general go-to tagline is it's about coming of age college superheroes that are fighting off supervillains and trying to find themselves at the same time. But because I'm doing an interview for you and you're lovely, I'll give you a little bit more information. So the book follows Kelsey Clay, who we've mentioned a couple times already. She's the protagonist. She's from Lake George, New York, and she's very much. I feel like agoraphobic is a very good word to describe her. She's very much to herself. She doesn't like to go out much. She's very afraid of herself and afraid of the world around her. And then she gets accepted into this college that it emails her and is like, hey, we're going to let you in for free, but you have to join this program called the Program 38. And she's like, can you give me more information about it? And they're like, no. So Kelsey kind of goes into this very blind, and she has a feeling it's about her superpowers, but she's trying to figure out how anyone found out about them. In her town, she is known as Crazy Kelly because of an incident that happened with her mom, where she ended up injuring her dad with her superpowers, and as such, she's very much kept it a secret outside of the people in town that already know. And she's like, how do they know? So most of the story is Kelsey getting acquainted with college itself, because college your first year as a freshman sucks. And for some reason it feels the hardest. So there's that. There's also the fact that she has to get acquainted with her roommate Nicole Aaron, who is a Hollywood movie star, and her best friend Emily, that being Kelsey's best friend Emily, believes she's a massive brat. So there's sort of like that divide between those two. And then there's, getting acquainted and adjusted to being a superhero, because Program 38, when they emailed her, wasn't like, yeah, here's your teammates. They were like, yeah, good luck. So they kind of have to figure it out on their own part of the way through the year. Like, in Kelsey's case, who's on her team, and that ends up being the superheroes, Comet, Royal Blue, and Red Eye. So she meets them later, and it's like, and then she starts to pick up on the fact that she's met them all in real life, mostly because she meets them for the first time in their civilian forms, and she's like, wait, I know you guys already. No, I'm fooling myself. What if they hate me? So it's very much like Kelsey's internal struggles. And then as the book sort of progresses, without saying exactly what happens, Kelsey makes a pretty fatal mistake in about the third way point of the book that ends up creating massive issues for the team, both in the present and in the future. And it sort of really leaves Kelsey to grapple with, is she even supposed to be a superhero when she just kind of messed things up for them in one of their big contenders. So she's just sort of grappling with it all while also dealing with like the worst math teacher on the face of the earth and the worst journalism teacher on the face of the earth. So it's very much like a story of exploration for her in a lot of ways. And then if she manages to find herself, that's great and amazing. And if she manages to fail at doing that, she's going to screw it up for a lot of people. So the book's big question is like, will Kelsey manage to succeed in finding herself? And will she become like a cool, epic, badass superhero? Or is she going to just end up destroying the school by accident? Which is very much a possibility with the massive ability to make razor shields. And she does do a bit of property damage. So
Indeed. Yeah, actually, there's a question on that. You have a lot of like tangible, real world stuff, people dealing with some complex emotion, personal struggles, self doubt. You also have things that are also based in reality, like the pandemic. Maybe some of the geography is also. How do you balance that realism with the more of the fantastical, the superhero side of the equation?
So as far as like geographical standpoint is concerned, I tried very hard to keep it both based in reality and fictitious. Lapis, Massachusetts doesn't exist. The closest thing you have to Sherman is Sherwood, Massachusetts, but there's no correlation, and that's just sort of quote where it's located. So basically, we'll pretend Sherwood, Massachusetts doesn't exist. I'm sorry if you live there, and we're gonna put Sherman in. So a lot of like the world building aspects of this universe, while placed in Earth, has like no real world counterpart. Like I went in and make sure like when I started the book, I had put real college names in for other colleges that are parts of the other programs. But then I was like, that might lead to some trouble later down the line if this ever becomes big. I don't want like an Ivy League school knocking on my door like, hey, you used our likeness without our permission. Not really in the mood to deal with that. So a lot of those elements, like Sherman University, is a fictitious location with no exact like real life counterpart. The other programs, which you'll learn about in book two, are also the same way. They're like located in a real life place, but are very much fictitious and don't exist. So that's kind of how I keep it separate. But because those locations are fictitious, the only thing in the book that has to be fictitious is like those locations' histories. Although some of them are located in real towns, so I hope those towns don't hate me afterward. Um, like Program 32, which is a French name, so I'm going to pronounce it wrong. It's called Shreveport University. It's in Phoenix, Arizona. I was just writing about that one. That's why it came to mind. So there's a little bit of real life in there. But when it comes to like more of the real life stuff, it felt like it had to be there because it's important to the narrative. It's important to the arc and the story. COVID for Kelsey, some of the other stuff for some of the other characters does play a part later down the road. So trying to find the balance is not as hard as you think when the fantastical elements sometimes will just so dramatically outweigh it. It's not as apparent in book one, but book two, they have one big bad character who's actually mentioned in book one, but they end up having to fight for a good portion of the book. And her powers are so ridiculous and bombastic and so dangerous that it ends up kind of pulling a lot of the realism out because they don't have a lot of time to worry about what's going on in 2022/2023 when their new adversary is constantly threatening to blow up the school.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, one of the things I actually another thing I did like about kind of like the realism inside and kind of bringing it to the grounded, tangible side of things is your use of color, which is a huge part of the book. How did you come up with that concept and like establish that that was a key element of how the characters interact with each other and some of the events that happen? Again, up to you as to how detailed you want to get into the answer.
Well, darn, you doing like the English teacher analysis here, and I was always wondering, like, I mentioned it very briefly on Chris's interview, but I was also very curious to see like if anyone else would naturally pick up on that. So yes, color and like symbolism, and its symbolism is very important to a lot of these characters because you asked, I'll go more further in depth about it. So for Kelsey, for example, her color palette starts off as both like blue and red. She's very much afraid of the world and very aggressive and very assertive. And like, I don't know why, but this is just an aside, but like 95% of like George's shirts are blue, I feel. Like I looked through my draw, like as I was making Kelsey's design, and I'm like, this one's blue, and this one's blue, and this one's blue. So it was just sort of like, oh wow, they like their blue there. So that's kind of why she kind of incorporated the blue because she's very much trapped in her home. She's very much like forced to fit into this mold of who she is perceived at is at home. So she has that, and the red sort of symbolizes her fear and her assertion and her aggression. And as time goes on, and even in her first design for Spark, she sort of adopts this yellow color as she's starting to come to terms with herself and trying to let more light and joy into her life. She adopts this yellow color palette at first with some splotches of her other teammates. Like I wish I could pull Spark's design up because if I could, it has like an orange band for Comet, a blue band for Royal Blue, and like by her waist a red crimsonish band for Red Eye. So her design sort of incorporates both her idea that she's slowly coming into herself, but also relying on others. And then when it inevitably does change again, which I don't want to get too much into, it's almost entirely yellow because she's fully embraced herself. And yellow has very much become Kelsey's color in the sense of like she's found light in herself and in those around her. She's found just hope in general, and I feel like it's very important to her. And color does play a big part in the series as a whole. For each of the characters, they're sort of going to undergo their whole little color thing later. But another one where it's very interesting is Jay, because Jay, for the most part, tends to stay in his shades of red, where like he's very much a dark red. There's really not a lot of other colors you could associate with him. His civilian form is red. His superhero form is red. He's red. And it's very strange because it's almost in contrast to his character. Because where Kelsey had that like aggression and assertion and just general fear associated with the red, when you look at Red Eye slash Jay as a character and as a person, you see that for him it's more of a facade. And that he's a very caring and loyal and very gentle person when he needs to be. So even for those two characters, red means a different thing. And also because we were talking about like variations on colors, there's Comet, who for some reason is associated with two colors because there's two very different sides to Wyatt. Like with Comet, you have this big boisterous orange, this big loud, I'm here, I want everyone to see me kind of thing. And while Wyatt is still very much like that, his more blue color palette is meant to represent that he doesn't necessarily want to be that. It was what he was taught to be as he's grown up. It was how he just kind of was forced to be because of his family and his general change of personality. So even though he's like, I'm here, I'm Comet, like all the time, he's also very much not 100% in on that. And you definitely see that more as the book progresses and as things change between Comet and the group. You definitely see that he kind of deviates a bit from like that I'm here, I'm Comet, I'm a part of the team tomorrow. I'm here, I'm Comet, and leave me the hell alone. So you see that shift with the color scheme too, where like the blue just eventually totally disappears, and in most instances later in the book, he's so far gone and removed that you only really see him as Comet.
There's a few times when I had to laugh at something that Comet did, and I'm like, oh man, yeah, you did that. Good job.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. We'll leave that in the suspense for people to go find out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting, you mentioned in the interview you had with Holly Reading Books, was that your plan is for the books to have different narrators for each
Yes.
book. Um, how did you choose who was the primary voice for each book, and also how many books you have in plan?
To answer your second question first, there are 7 books. There are 4 that sort of follow this continuous main thread of Kelsey and Program 38 and like the looming prophecy, and then there's 3 more that are sort of spin-offs. They hold like 1 or 2 of the main characters from the original group, and then they end up having like a new cast of characters in addition. So like rather than it following Jay Kelsey, Wyatt, Nicole, it more so follows like we'll just say like Jay's life after the big prophecy event and like what he chooses to do with a couple other characters, and then, some of the old characters pop back in and out, but that's just dependent on who's alive at any point. To answer your first question, yeah, this book actually is pretty tame compared to some of the later ones, because this book is pretty gentle on what it does to the characters. I say as I refer back to chapter 8, which is really funny. But I say I'm tame, and then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So for the most part, the voice of the character is directly in correlation with who the bad guy of the book ends up being. I feel like for book 2, for example, the character who was supposed to narrate the book when I started outlining it ended up becoming the bad guy. So I was like, oops. So I ended up realizing like, oh, he can't narrate it and be the bad guy at the same time. And with book 2 especially, I really struggled with who to make the narrator. And the reason why we even like figured it out was because I was just freaking out, because like initially it was supposed to be Emily, and it just wasn't working because like she doesn't have the relationship with the bad guy that she needed to. She has a relationship with them, but she doesn't have like a good one. And then I was just sitting there freaking out trying to make it work. I had written about half of it, and my best friend texts me, "How about you try Vanessa?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, Vanessa?" And he's like, "She's far enough removed from the bad guy that she can still be somewhat objective, but also, will be, a strong enough character at this point to then, give more screen time to, because as you know, she's a character that doesn't get a lot." I was avoiding trying to bring her up, and then I did it anyway. But yeah, if you're here first, folks, there's a character in Program 38 named Vanessa. What she does and anything else about her, you'll have to read the book to find out.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and I think it's a really interesting way to approach the story, because you mentioned in that interview how if you really don't like one character, you just wait, get to the next one. But I think the other thing that's interesting about it is that we've seen, well, having read the book, we've seen how the world kind of looks from Kelsey's perspective. But then into the next book, it'll be interesting to see how that character perceives the world and interacts with it. Because we've been in the head of Kelsey, we understand kind of a little bit more about what she's about and the things that drive her. But then that gives you the ability to pivot and to do something like completely different. Although I will say, I don't know if I'm really prepared for the next book based on your statement of this was the mild one, because yes, chapter 8, oh my gosh, I'm glad that I watched the interviews before reading the book, because I was like, all right, mentally prepare myself for chapter 8, which we won't go into detail, but my gosh, when that chapter hit, I was just like, oof, ooh.
Yeah. Just a warning before you read it. Just be prepared, because this book, chapter 8 is like the pivotal moment in this book, and it's just extremely hardcore. Yeah, chapter 15 is also kind of brutal, but yeah, we will avoid talking about that. Yeah, this is the more mild book. To the point before yes, it is going to be very interesting to see how the characters interact with the world and how they feel differently about it, because book 2 is this character named Vanessa, and book 3 and 4 is Nicole and Jay, who are two very established characters by the point in time when they narrate. Nicole has a very, very, and you can even see this in book 1, very different view of the world than someone like Kelsey would, because like while Kelsey's traumatized, Nicole's a whole different type of traumatized, more so by the point we hit her book. So she's very, like, yes, Kelsey is very pessimistic and hates the world a lot of the times, but then she's like, Jay's nice. Ooh. Nicole doesn't have much of that, I would say, in the sense of like she's very like she knows she can rely on her friends at this point, but she's also sort of like the mother hen of the group, of like she knows everything, she knows everyone's secrets, she has to deal with everyone's problems. So her view is almost a little more nihilistic, but yet everyone kind of forces her to be like, you have to be the one who's mentally stable, because of course you do. And she's like, I do? I didn't know that. So it's very interesting to see how differently these characters perceive the world. And then there's Vanessa, who looks at everything like freaking Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony. It's like, everything's going to be great. It's going to be okay. Everything is awesome. She has very, and it makes watching the descent of book 2 a little bit funnier, because you go from like Kelsey, who's very straightforward and is like, I have a hunch of who the bad guy is. It's probably this person, and even though I don't want it to be, I can deal with it. Vanessa's approach is very much like, what? No, this can't be the truth. This isn't the case. You can still change. Let him change. It's very much it's very much a contrast from how long it takes Kelsey to sort of accept the situation she's in to Vanessa, who just hands and whatever, and she's like, oh, I guess he doesn't want to change then. So
That's awesome.
it's, yeah, I'm very proud of it. And then there's Jay, who's just like, hello world, I hate everyone. I'm gonna break the fourth wall every 5 seconds. And by the time Jay's narrative rolls around, the world's kind of ending anyway. And I felt like having the like blunt, stoic guy narrate that book just made the most sense because he's just got that like damn feel like every time something goes wrong, that's just in book one and onward, it's just taking like to fix everyone's messes, damn it, and then just running off to do the thing. So I felt like it was a good sort of compliment to the whole idea of, there's a giant worldwide battle that's going to either destroy the world or save it. My goodness gracious, what I have to do everything all the time kind of thing. Yeah, Nicole and Jay have a similarity in that, where they are sort of pivoted to these roles of, like, we have to be the mentally stable ones because Kelsey and Wyatt and Vanessa won't be. Because Wyatt's very much not.
In your interview, I believe it was with the Holly Reading Books, you mentioned that the Book of Viceroy has a premise around 9 days to save the world, and I was curious about where does this fit in, if at all, to the current universe, and what can you tell me about that story?
So, Book of Viceroy actually exists in the same universe with the 9 days to end the world thing occurring after 38. So it might be very apparent at this point that the world doesn't get destroyed by the prophecy, but let's just say it's not in good shape. It's not, they don't get off squeaky clean because they figured out how to stop the prophecy ahead of time. There's lots of torment and misery. But Book of Viceroy takes place in the same universe, but in a way where it's sort of just like, oh crap, there's a very obvious difference to this universe than a standard one that I don't want to spoil because it's really cool. But it doesn't have almost any connection to the world besides that, except for the fact that, like, the god of reality, the god of creation, the god of destruction, although in this universe they're called concepts, are prominent figures because they were prominent figures in the Battle of the 38 series. So, like, they're not connected, and the 38 characters don't even know the world was supposed to end on September 17th of 2027. They get looped in on this information much later. So it fits in a way where, like, you can enjoy this Book of Viceroy, without having to read all the 38 books, but it also provides some, like, additional, like, oh, look at this cool thing that you wish you knew about in 38, because it would have certainly helped kind of elements to it. And I think that's cool because, like, Book of Viceroy is a very different kind of book. It's about 5 characters basically taking a road trip, and it's very much, well, yes, 38's about the found family too, but Book of Viceroy, you're trapped in a car with them and in a hallway of a million doors with them for a good portion of the book. So instead of it being more about, like, oh no, there's big bad supervillains, it's more like they become supervillains unto themselves, towards each other, and with themselves because they're being kind of tortured with this whole road trip, because it's not a linear road trip, because a road trip from Vancouver to Orange, Massachusetts would just be too easy. It takes about 2 days. They end up getting thrown into this roundabout place called the Hall of a Million Doors, which can take you forward in time, back in time, to alternate realities, to other places in the country, to other places in the world, and they just sort of get thrown off their path. They get lucky they don't get thrown off too much that they end up in, like, another reality or, like, on the other side of the planet. But, like, they'll get super close to Vancouver, and then they'll end up on the other side of the country, and they'll be like, we gotta start all over again, we gotta find another door. So they don't, of course, take the roundabout way, which would just be to just drive. But they're like, if we could get there faster, maybe we could just take these doors. And it ends up regretting it every time they do it. And then they end up having to take a door to save their skin to get back where they need to be. And it just ends up eating away at their time. But yes, you can very much enjoy Book of Viceroy without, like, having the knowledge of Program 38, because it's more like, I guess, aesthetic changes to their universe in a way. So it's just, it's very fun. It's very separate. And there's going to be 2 Book of Viceroy books. I actually started writing the second one yesterday. So hear it here first with Glenn.
That's awesome. And like the way you're describing it, it sounds like you have this like huge universe and world kind of building going on. How do you keep track of all that information, and what's your normal process for coming up with these details? Like, do you sit down and like plan it out, or do you feel like you just have a general concept and then just go?
My joke answer is that I rely on my best friends to keep track of all the book stuff for me because I will literally just go, "Do you remember?" And, like, he'll tell me because his memory is amazing. My serious answer is more so that I am very much a pantser. So on the first draft, I will write it all out, try and figure it out as I go, and then on the second draft, I'll go back in and take more in-depth notes about certain aspects and elements, and for some reason, still don't manage to get them all squared away. As far as the world building is concerned, a lot of the world building and elements do come in more so with Book of Viceroy because 30 tries very hard to stay more towards the realism part of the magical realism. And then Book of Viceroy and its subsequent short stories end up being more so on the magical side of the magical realism. Because the whole Million Doors exists in the program 38 universe, but the extent of them knowing about it is that Jay sees a door floating in the middle of a room one time and just chalks it up to the fact he hasn't slept in 3 days and just goes to sleep and just the door disappears and he never interacts with it ever again. So that's basically, it's very much hidden and off on its own, whereas like the Book of Viceroy is very much, it's in your face, it's right here. This is basically your main method of travel. So that's sort of how you're able to kind of keep them separate while also existing in the same universe. So yeah, it is cool. I like it a lot.
That's awesome. I feel like I need to find myself a friend where I can just download his brain or his or her brain periodically. Like, hey, what was the thing that's going on in this story? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, no joke. Like Thomas is amazing. He just has a good memory for that. And he's read some of these books like 2.5 years ago almost. So like sometimes I'll forget, which is okay because I forgot like 85% of it. And the fact he has that 85% that I don't is usually good. But a lot of the times it's just sort of like it's always good to have that. It's like it's also the reason I made a Wikipedia for 38. If you read program 38, you want help, there's a Wikipedia. So I can have other people help me keep track of my book. I was like so ambitious that this was going to be a big thing. I'm like, this is going to be the next Percy Jackson, the next Harry Potter. I'm going to have a whole fandom. It's okay. We're working on it though. We're getting there.
Yeah, get that boulder rolling. I guess as a curiosity, so you mentioned several years ago. When did you start writing this specific book? And then can you speak to a little bit more about how long you tend to take on a book, like from the very original idea or initial drafts all the way up to what, like, okay,
So I actually have a pretty decisive answer for you on the first one. The first book came into existence on May 12th of 2022 when I made a small little joking like animation video about a superhero that was about 3 seconds long. I showed it to Alex and he was like, "This is cool. So you should make a superhero story." And I was like, "Nah, fam." So and then he was like, "Yes, you should." So from me having that conversation with Alex to actually having the first draft of the book finished took about 3 months. I happened to be writing a different book at the time. I didn't end up releasing that book, but I was writing it um, for a different series. And then, so it took me a little bit longer than I was planning, but then I had like started from May to July. Something happened where I had to take about a 2 week break that and like it impacted the direction of the story even, and then ended up finishing from the middle of July to the end of August. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to put this down for a bit. And, at that point, Thomas had read that book and was like, cool, you should consider writing another one. And I was like, you think this can go anywhere? And he was like, I have faith this will be like a super big thing if you actually see it through. So I then, instead of just taking his advice and writing one, went through and wrote the next six of them and then looked back a year and a half later almost and was like, oh wow, I wrote six more books. Huh, what am I going to do? And then I I hadn't touched the first one since like August of 22, and it was like, oh wow, I finished the series now. I've got to like do something with the first one so I can get it out there. So so from like I would say maybe mid January of this year to about April of this year, I ended up editing the book pretty vigorously myself. I rewrote most of it actually because it had been so much time between when I wrote it the first time and when I wrote it now. I didn't manage to fix everything I wanted to, but it's okay. I was kind of scrambling with finals and college and graduating, so I got it like basically patted down in April. I took like a month off because graduation, chaos, grad school, and then ended up going back to it in like early July. And I ended up hiring my editor, Debbie Burke. She had it for a while. I got it back like mid-August, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna just start the ball rolling now. I should just before I rewrite it again, I should just get it out there so that people can enjoy it. So it did take a while, but there was also a long period of time where like no movement was being made on this particular book because I wrote book 2 and then book 3 and book 4, so on and so forth, and just kept writing them because, you know, I had an audience reading them, an audience being like 2 or 3 of my friends, and I was like, they're enjoying it, I might as well keep going. So I kind of wrote and wrote and wrote about it until I hit like the natural conclusion point, and then was like, okay, now I know what I have and how the story's gonna go. I'm gonna just edit it now and I'm gonna get it out there. So also for those of you who are wondering, no, any complaints, yelling, or other discourse on social media about these books will not influence how they turn out because from the moment I published book 1, I knew everyone's face, I knew what was gonna happen to every character, and I highly doubt anything's really going to change that for them. So a lot
That's
of a
fair.
lot of a lot of TV shows and movies will shy away from doing things because they know that their audience isn't going to particularly like it. And I didn't want the chance to be swayed. So I was like, I'm going to just do it all in one clip.
Yeah, I guess it definitely came across through the book that this is very much a like this is your book, which I really appreciate. I feel like sometimes people try to water it down or change it to try and meet a certain demographic or certain market. But with your book, it was very much like this is your book, and I think that sets it apart from other books that I've read recently of like it has the authenticity of its voice. So I really appreciated that you did that. You talked a bit about the the challenges of trying to write in around a very hectic time. What would you say are some tips or tricks that you found that worked well with like writing routines? Like, did you find that doing like writing sprints helped you? Do you have like a certain period of time or a certain place you try to go to? How does that help? Or what have you found that helps you in terms of trying to be consistent or make those deadlines for yourself?
So generally speaking, I wrote most of these books in college, so I found myself writing a lot of them at night. I found another thing that helped me, especially while I was editing book 1, is that I was doing writing sprints with some writer-weight author. So I had like a set amount of time that I had to be writing or otherwise working on Program 38 in order to, fulfill my duty as a co-host of that sprint. So that definitely helped. But for me, most of the time when I write, it's more of when I have the time. It's A, when I have the energy, and B, when I have the time. I tend to do it a lot at night because I'm a night owl. But also, fun fact about Book of Viceroy, not related to this, but still kind of cool, is that I actually wrote Book of Viceroy in about 6 days. I had a road trip that I had to take that was pretty much 12 hours each day. I went from Pennsylvania to California, and I drove straight through with my family. And in those 12-hour car rides, I spent almost the entire 12 hours straight just writing chapters of Book of Viceroy. So Book of Viceroy was definitely a when I found the time to do a book because I literally had indefinite time and just staring at like the plains of Arkansas just wasn't gonna do it for me. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get this book done while I'm here. I wrote the first 7 chapters before I left very slowly, took my time, very methodical, like just when I had the time, and then like chapters 8 through 21 all the way through in like a 6 day period. It was crazy. So for me, it's really like when I have the time. As I said, writing is something that comes so naturally to me that like if I try to put it in a routine, it kind of like freezes itself up. So I very much have to like take breaks when my brain literally won't work with me. So I'm not a very routine writer. That's also the reason I wanted to get the books done before I put them out, was because I know that I don't work the best on deadlines if they're set by myself. So I would probably push myself back more and more every time. Just to be like, well, do I really need to get it done without like an external thing like college making me do things on time? I feel like I would struggle a bit more. So I was like, I'm gonna write them all so that like the timelines and the deadlines are more so just for editing them rather than, oh crap, I got the first one out and to keep the hype going, I have to write the next one in like the next 3 months. Oh no. I mean, I'm rewriting book 2 now as we speak. I have 2 chapters left, but like I'm at a point where like if I had to publish it tomorrow, I probably could. So that's sort of my approach. Is just if it's with the flow, and it annoys my professors a lot because like they'll give me all this advice of like, yeah, set a time, make yourself some tea, to have a rhythm. And like, guys, you don't understand. The brain speaks to me when it wants to. If you tell me to get up and write at 11 a.m. every day or whatever time, it just might choose to speak to me. It might be like, I'm not talking to you today, and like I can't afford that. So like, if I do it at 1 in the morning, I do it at 1 in the morning. I'll clean it up later. It'll be fine.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. It's something that I've seen people talk about, like even on threads, is like, oh, you should do this, and this is the time you should do it. You should do all these things. But the thing that I found is, like you say, is um, everybody's different. Like some people, they really like the structure, they like timelines, they like deadlines. Other people, it's like, come and go. It's like maybe you're in the moment right now, maybe you're not. So it's interesting to hear about that. You talk about how, for you, writing is, it kind of just like flows out of you. What would you say are more of the challenging sides of writing from your perspective?
So to answer your question, I find world building to be especially hard. My joke about Thomas being my keeper of lore was not exactly a joke because like I can go through and write really fast in a clip, but then like remembering all the exact details of everything I've just written can be very difficult. So then when I'm going through beta editing with Thomas and a couple others, they'll just be like, okay, what the heck? You said this thing here, and then like 2 chapters later, you said this. So why did you change it? And it's not that I didn't like what I wrote initially. It's more so I just didn't remember that it was there, and it was like, oh, so then I had to start making notes, and then I would forget to take the notes, and like, so yeah, world building is especially difficult for me, even though the like task of writing itself is very like natural and flowy to me. If one, if it doesn't want to come, it doesn't come, and two, if it's world building related, sometimes I have a bit more trouble remembering it because the characters are very intuitive in my brain. They kind of live in my imagination in my head, so they kind of say like a stable things. But with like the world building of the character, like the places around them, it can be rough because it could be like, okay, yes, there's these details about these characters, but the world around them seems to shift quite a bit. And like, how do I keep track of that? How do I manage that? Which is why a lot of the locations, especially in the first book, are very stagnant. Like they are basically only at Sherman. And it's mostly because I kind of struggle with the world building elements. Book of Viceroy and its sequel was very much a departure from what I'm comfortable with, and even then the sequel goes back to focusing on being in one place. So it was sort of like very much departure from what I'm used to. And I didn't like it, so I was.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And props to you for doing something kind of out of the norm, or out of your comfort zone. It's I find like as a writer, that's where there's some interesting things that can happen. Is where you start pushing those boundaries. You start experimenting with things that you haven't done before. One of the things I thought that you did really well, and this is actually how I learned about your book and yourself, is on social media you created these little bios, and you had like a picture and a little information about the characters. I feel like I haven't really seen that as much. I mean, I'm sure there might be someone else that's doing it too, but the thing that really picked it out for me was those little bios. And then even more recently, you had like voice actors go through and like read dialogue, which I thought was pretty sweet. So the question for you is, how do you feel like social media has played a part in like in your story, in how you've now sharing your story and how you're interacting with readers? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, it's a good portion of how the book has gotten out there to the public. I mean, without social media, I wouldn't have a lot of platforms to really promote the book. I have found a lot of really great people, you being one of them, through threads, and a lot of very like loyal and dedicated people. I've had my fair share of fights with Instagram. I'm brawling with them on a regular basis, but like threads especially has been really useful for getting it out there because like there's a certain level of threads that is just vibing and unhingedness, and I feel like that's a lot easier to like I guess, push a book on than Instagram because it needs to look all glitzy and pretty. And I'll spend like literally, I spent 3 hours making the post of the four superheroes because I was trying to find like the perfect lines and like make them look good. And then I get like 15 likes and I'm like, dang it. But then I go on Threads and I rant about how much I hate marketing and then 500 people, 500 likes and 20,000 views later, and I have like 7 more orders. And like, well, I see what's working and what's not. So yeah, I found that for the most part, when I started out, Instagram got me in touch with a lot of great people like Rain Winters and Summer Dwade and A.R. Maxwell. And like just in general, it was a good place to start and it was a good motivator on like finishing the book and getting it out. And then as I was promoting it more, I moved more to Threads and met people like you and a lot of others. There's so many people that come to mind when I think of Threads, and like listing them out would just be kind of unfair. I found every single person who voice acted for the thing on Threads, with the exception of obviously Alex because I know him personally. But like I believe I found Tyreer, I found Joe and Michaela and Vika and Darren. I found all of them through Threads, which was super nice. I put it up on Instagram and it got absolutely no buzz. But then I went on Threads and it was like funny. Oh, I actually had to turn a few people down, which made me sad because there was a lot of overlap. A lot of people, and I mean a lot of people auditioned for Jay because I had to open him up later after something happened with the first person. So it was very interesting too that like I was able to have those opportunities because I had access to social media and Threads, and like I've become good friends with like Michaela and Joe and all of them. So it's sort of like not only did I get like a cool favor from them and they helped me out with this cool thing that they're now a part of, but I also got like good friends out of the deal. So it's just been nice really getting to like talk to people and engage with them, especially on Threads. Threads is a very inclusive and engaging platform. It allows people like you and I to meet. It allows you to just have like the most random conversations with just strangers on the internet, which is a lot of fun. And it's been very good for promoting the book. And Threads has such a nice community of writers and a generally good atmosphere when we're not on witch hunts. So it's nice.
Yeah, and I saw that I guess another platform is Facebook. You mentioned that you got a shout out from the Trill Doctor on Star Trek Picard. Like that's pretty
So yeah, I actually use Facebook pretty frequently too. My web of connections through my dad being a director is very big, but also mostly through Facebook because they are, a little bit older than me, so they tend to use Facebook as their primary source. So I have gotten a lot of sales through Facebook too, because Tiffany Shep has endorsed the book, Ming Chen endorsed the book, Jeremy Ambler endorsed the book, like the director Gertrude endorsed the book. Like the amount of people that just shared it, like I was scrolling through my dad's phone and like every second post on his feed was Program 38. It was very eye opening because it was super awesome to see all of these people that my dad was friends with, and a lot of them watched me grow up through his Facebook page, like really come together and like help like me push this out there. And like I know some of these people on my own too, so I was able to like get them to help me. But it was just nice to have like a super kind and supportive community of just people that I'm friends with. Even like I've worked with Tiffany many times. She's an incredible human being. She's a rights activist. She's just she's wonderful. So I was like seeing her be like, go buy my book, besides her just being an incredible person in general and, being from Star Trek, which is another huge deal. It was just so nice to be like, wow, she actually cared about what I did and chose to support me on her own. So it was just like, whoa, that's awesome. So I was really, really lucky that I got quite a few of these people. I actually was reintroduced to Ming Chen at Big Apple Comic Con when I went on Saturday. Was that Saturday or Sunday? I think it was Saturday. Yeah, so it was nice to get to meet some new people while I was there. I got to meet Al Milgram, I think. Yeah, I think it's Milgram, who helped co-create the spot, and I thought that was super cool. So like, I've been super blessed through social media, Facebook and Thread especially, to have some like really great opportunities.
Do you think that Threads will make an appearance in the future book? I know you mentioned that you're, quote unquote, not going to change based on what's happening in social media.
Well, I meant more so like, let's just say, for example, I killed Jay off, right? And that doesn't happen in book one, but you get my point. Like, just say I choose to kill Jay off, and like the entire universe decides to riot about how mad they are about me killing off Jay. I'm not still out of my way to then go and be like, I'm gonna resurrect him because everyone likes him. And I'm not going to like protect the characters that should by virtue die because the fandom likes them. That's more what I meant. As far as like keeping up with the trends and stuff, yeah, the other social medias will probably make an appearance in this book because they're relevant to the culture and relevant to the media. So Threads probably make an appearance. But when I wrote book 2, 3, and 4, like Threads just came into existence, I think, last year. So like it wasn't something that's in there yet. But I suspect like Nicole will definitely be like a Threads person. I could see that going very well for her actually. Like Star goes like incognito, makes 1,000 friends on Friends, makes 1,000 friends on Threads. So yeah, I do see like as far as like that kind of stuff is concerned, like minor details and like further fleshing out the world building, yeah, I'm willing to make changes there. But like, oh my goodness, you killed Jay, how dare you? No, not changing stuff like that. So it's more so that was more of what I meant there. But I do see the books changing. Even when I rewrote the second book, I see them kind of changing to reflect the times a bit. And when I go back and re-edit book 2, I plan to even like put a little bit more of that in there. So like they're gonna change as time progresses. But I wrote books 3 and 4 before 2023 to 24 and 24 to 25 happened. I mean, we haven't even gotten to 2025 yet. The whole big prophecy that we're worried about in this book series can still happen. So I didn't write it with all the knowledge that I could or should have. And it's definitely interesting because, like, especially in writing Book of Viceroy, because one of the characters is younger, like, my natural inclination is to, like, make them use slang. And I'm like, I want them to say, like, Riz or Skibbity Toilet or whatever. And then I'm like, I'm still 2 years behind the bell curve here. That might not even be a thing when we get there. So, yeah, it's more about, like, refining it to the culture if it comes out at a point where we've gone through it already. If not, it's just, guessing and throwing darts at a wall.
Yeah, that's fair. I remember watching a movie where they talked about that concept of they were making the movie, and at the time that they wrote the script was about a year or two before it actually would come out. And they talked about the challenge of trying to write a story that had like current day lingo, but in the past, like so they had to write for the future things that we would then use as like hip and happening language or whatnot. So that's that's interesting that you mentioned that. And I feel like I'm a little worried for Jay because you've mentioned that a few times now. Of oh, I hope people don't get well. If people get upset, it's like that's just how it's gonna be. But I'll leave it there because I don't want you to spoil your own book. But I did want to say one of the other flexes. I don't know if you thought of this as a flex or not. Is in the first paragraph. You use a semicolon in the proper way to use a semicolon, which I honestly like when I was reading through it and I hit that semicolon, I was like, wow, like leading off a book with the correct use of a semicolon. Props. But the segue then is what would you say is something that like from a writing perspective that you could say to other writers that are going through the writing experience? What's something that you've learned that you feel like would be helpful to others as they're trying to go through their own books or go through publishing, etc.?
So the thing that I've found while reading a lot of other people's independent works, and I'm not going to call anyone out in particular, this is just a general thing, is that a lot of people, and I suffer from the same thing. You'll see it throughout the first program 38 book, but you'll see the second one definitely has a lot less of it. I use a lot of filler words, like the word just is very much a filler word, or saying seemed to or appeared to. There's a lot of like words like that. Now is another one where it's like you're using those words to try and like filler bust the book to make it larger to kind of compensate for there not being as much meat and potatoes. And it's something that my editor taught me of like, you have to take some of these words out because it definitely will kill like the flow of your writing. Like Kelsey, and like I'll admit this, Kelsey sounds kind of unconfident at points because she says seems to appear to a lot because like even in the editing process it got so tiring and tedious that I was like, I'm not removing them all. I'm just gonna do my best and hope for the best and hope it's not too glaring. But it's something that I would encourage people who are going through the editing process and looking for to try and really avoid those filler words because I found in the ones that I was able to take out, that it really did help enhance the writing. Where like I'm not a I have a gripe with the whole don't use adverbs thing. Like that's very much a part of my style, and I've tried to remove it, but sometimes like that I find, but like the filler words thing is very important. Like now I see it in other people's writing, and it just makes me cringe just a slight bit. Not because their writing is bad at all, but just because it's like I've learned this, and I want to tell other people about it. That the word "just" is like your biggest enemy. So
Yeah, that's fair. And it's funny because, as you mentioned, I recently came across this knowledge too, and it's funny how before I had seen this or heard this, I'd read through my own work and be like, "Oh, this is fine," but then having learned that, I now go back through my own work and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, like the word choices and filler words and like just like meh words." It's really interesting. Yeah, I guess anything else that you would like to say to an aspiring writer, someone who's maybe not picked up the pen or I guess typing, because I don't know if anybody writes with pens anymore. Anything that you would like to say to that kind of crew?
yeah, it's always the hardest when you start. Like there's this fear of starting and staring at the blank page and just trying to figure out how to get it out. Just throw the words onto the page. It doesn't matter if they sound good together. It doesn't matter how they flow together. It doesn't really matter how like it looks at first. Just to get it out there, get a feel of what your writing style is like, and like what the story you're trying to tell is. Because there's always second drafts, third drafts, so on and so forth to revise your work. And for a lot of aspiring writers, it's just about taking the leap of faith, and they're just afraid to. And I'm going to tell you, for someone who's been doing this for like 9 years now, it started in middle school, just do it. There's no harm to the first like 5 or 6 things you write being bad, because like the more you work on it, the better you will get. A, from just learning from yourself and seeing what works, but also reading the works of other authors, especially independent authors, because the hell they go through to try and get their stuff out is crazy, and they're especially perfectionists, but also just living life. Like life is your best like tool and tutor. Like you will just experience things as you go on. Like I would have never thought I would write a college like superhero story. I thought that I would be writing like magical realism and kids with magical powers fighting bad guys like in a different way forever. And as like 12-year-olds, whereas my writing now, because of my experiences and things that have happened to me, is like more mature and more about like struggles that real people have. Where like when you're writing about 12-year-olds who are kids fighting supervillains, it's not the same really. You're not writing about the nuances necessarily, because they're just kids and they're just trying to have fun. Whereas like now I don't write like that. So my advice would be generally just give it a shot. You're going to live your life and live through experiences that are going to shape you as both a person and a writer. So that'll help. Reading other people's work will help, and just being willing to be confident of yourself for yourself and just believing in what you're capable of is probably the most important thing you can do, and something that I very much struggled with. So I'm going to just encourage you to give it a shot, even if you're doing it alone. I was very fortunate that I had friends in my life that would constantly motivate me and push me, but find those people too. That's another good piece of advice. Find the people that will read your work, find the people that will help you. You are not alone, and it's just trust yourself and trust that your story's worth telling.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Um, yeah, especially trusting yourself. I feel like a lot of times writers have this kind of like this doubt aspect of is what I'm writing good enough? Do I even know what I'm doing? Why am I doing this? All these questions, and it's just like just dump it onto the page and figure it out in editing. So definitely great advice. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about, or anything that you'd like to share to any either person who's read the book or someone who's potentially looking into it?
So I really think that this book is special for the people who haven't read it, because it's both innovative in what it tries to do, but it also has a very important message. We haven't really touched on it much. I've mentioned it once or twice, but I really want to. Program 38 Sparks is about finding your people and finding yourself. And I feel like there's not a lot of media that does that in a way that exposes every side of it. Whereas, like, when you follow the hero's journey, you usually see a hero that's, like, very, they've kind of figured themselves out. They have, like, one kind of problem they're dealing with, and they're just trying to get to that resolution. Whereas, like, I want people to read Program 38 and realize that Kelsey's a lot like them. I mean, She's dealing with a lot of stuff at once. She doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't know who she even really wants to be. And I feel like Program 38 is a good reminder that it's okay to be in that spot, regardless of where you are in your life. Maybe something's happened that's made you kind of lose your way, or maybe you're just going to college for the first time and are scared of like meeting new people. But I feel like a lot of media just doesn't remind us that it's completely normal to like break down every once in a while, or completely normal to just not know who you are, or to not immediately trust people when you first meet them. Because a lot of found family stories are like, I met you like 2 minutes ago and we are best friends now. But like Program 38, one of its major themes is figuring out weighing trust and who to tell the truth to and who not to. And it's very important to me, I feel, that people realize that when they're reading this book, that it's about trust. There are people in this world that you can trust and will be your friends and will ride or die with you. And then there's some people who will pretend to be your friends and then disappear or betray you in some way, or you'll have some sort of misunderstanding that ends up with you in a horrible collateral damage situation. Kelsey causes some trouble for some people. But yeah, it's very important that people like reading this book know that. And I feel like it's a reason why everyone should read this book. Not just because I wrote it, because yes, you should read it. I wrote it and it's great, but also because it's really a piece of media, and especially throughout the series, that does stay true to itself, and it's very real. Like every character's struggle. Yes, there are superpowers, and Kelsey's afraid of using them, but that fear doesn't come necessarily from, oh my god, superpowers. It comes from, I hate myself. I wish I didn't exist with these abilities, and I wish that I was a different person, rather than it just being superpowers. And it's sort of a similar thing for Vanessa in the next book. Is her struggle is, yes, it's related to the superpowers, but she ends up getting very stuck in someone else's shadow, and like feeling like she has to be this specific person, and that this person that she's looking up to and trying to be actually really doesn't like her at all. So it's a very real scenario where it's like, don't like look up to your heroes, don't like admire your heroes so much that you lose sight of yourself. And if he struggles with that, even though it's more of a superpower based dilemma, it's still very real, because she's struggling with that while also struggling with missing home, because she's the oldest of like 7 siblings. She's also dealing with moving in with someone that she's not particularly fond of, because when she gets to back there her second year, it's like, oh, I'm living with you? Oh, things didn't go too well between us the first time we interacted. So there's like, Program 38 is really good at keeping like a myriad of problems open, and very real problems you can face, while not being like all the characters are perfect and have one problem, I feel.
Yeah, no, I definitely got that vibe, and I think it's an important, important way to come about this writing, and so I appreciate you doing it. And I realized this fairly early on, with the character Nicole. There's a moment I won't talk about in too much detail, but there's a moment early on where it like I didn't see it coming, but then I was like, that's so real. Like, and I appreciated that it wasn't like, I don't know how to say it. It wasn't like a generic, oh, this is what happens in a book. This character tends to do this kind of thing. It was like, wow, that's a thing that I can believe happening, and like I can actually feel it, because it's like, yeah, I resonate with the reality of that situation and the feelings that this person is feeling.
Are you
So
talking about the
definitely,
scene in the bathroom? Because I'm totally fine if we talk about that one, because it's pretty early on.
sure, yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
Yeah, so the character Nicole, basically, for those of you who don't know, is a Hollywood starlet. She is like fresh out of being extremely famous in Hollywood, but she hates her life. She hates her mom. She hates basically everything about it, and she goes to Sherman to run away from it all. So basically, the scene that Glenn is referring to is Kelsey is dealing with a bunch of her own crap and is like freaking out over math test, and she just hears crying in the bathroom. That they have like a suite, so they have 2 bathrooms. So she hears Nicole crying in the bathroom, and she's like, we all cry in the bathroom a little bit in college. It's totally normal. So Kelsey goes in and tries to comfort her, but she finds out that her mom has been spreading like tabloids rumors about her back in Hollywood, and it's been leaking into her life here at Sherman. And I feel like Glenn's right. That scene is very real. Nicole's character is, I would say, arguably the most underdeveloped in this book, but that's because she has a lot of time to get past that. But it is a very real moment for Nicole, because not only do we see her very vulnerable, like right off the bat with, crying on the floor in the bathroom and like entrusting this complete stranger with her entire family history and trauma, but also just Kelsey's end of it too, of not fully knowing how to help her, not really knowing fully if she can trust her, because like she can relate to what Nicole's going through because her parents are just as bad, but she doesn't take that angle in helping her. She just sort of puts on a bold and bright face and just tries to cheer her up, just generally speaking. So Nicole really, and the whole tabloids thing as a whole ends up lending to a different argument, but it's very real for her situation and like just social media in general. There's like, for Nicole, it's a little different. Yeah, she's a Hollywood star, but it's something that we could all very realistically relate to, like rumors and lies being spread about us online, if not it happening directly to us. The fear of it occurring, the fear of like having to be perfect all the time and not accidentally say anything inappropriate or bad in a place where it could be recorded or taken out of context. So I definitely agree with Glenn with the fact that that scene feels very real, and I feel it's one of the most important scenes of the book because it's one of those scenes that definitely resonates. Like, you have scenes like chapter 8 that's just like, oh my goodness, but then you have scenes like chapter 3 with Nicole in the bathroom where it's just sort of like, oh, this is something that could very much happen. You have the argument that takes place in the next chapter that's very much like, oh, you feel like this could really happen. And there's a lot of scenes like that. There's a scene later in the book, it's not a huge spoiler, so I'll talk about it, but like, in order to try and like make things right with the person Kelsey had an argument with, she actually invites, well, the other person just comes over and insists on playing video games with her. And I feel like it's a very real kind of bridge to the solution because like they're trying to become friends again and like they're both actively making an effort, but it's not like some big bombastic superhero thing that really does it for them. It's them sitting in their dorm playing a video game on the TV, and it's like just a wholesome moment. And 38 has a lot of those where the relationships are nuanced beyond like this one's the supervillain, program 38's the superheroes, we gotta take out the supervillains. And I like that. These are still college kids going through things like petty arguments and rumors online and self-doubt and missing their family a lot. Even Jay arguing with Kelsey at one point in the book, when she brings up kind of a sore subject and he ends up screaming and yelling at her, is not really superhero based, but also very much a possibility. Like, it's something that definitely has happened a fair share of times to me in college, and I've seen happen to other people, where like sometimes you just hit a sore spot and it just launches off from there.
Yeah, and I feel like this is reflected in your little bio blurb I pulled from Amazon. I'll just read it here because I thought it was really interesting. So you say, fresh out of her creative writing bachelor's degree at Western New England University, she plans to do just that, writing stories that inspire people to find the good in themselves. That's a powerful statement. What led you to writing for that purpose? Like, what about it resonates with you that that's the is it like a driving force behind your books?
Because I struggled with that a lot, and to this day I still do. I suffer from really bad imposter syndrome, so I really struggle to see the good in myself and the value of the work that I've done over my time at college and just in general. And I feel like if there's a way that I can help people avoid that and see themselves in characters like Kelsey and Jay and the others, that it would be good for people to have those characters to lean back on and rely on because they are going through similar experiences and they're feeling the same way. But even though Kelsey feels like a monster and a terrible person and just feels horrible, there's always someone there like Jay to help her, figure it out and get through it. And I feel like the world needs more of that. I mean, it took me way too long to find the people that I consider my close friends. I went like 18 years with basically no one that I really had good communication with and felt like I truly belonged with. And then when I hit college, I finally found people like Alex and Thomas and all of them that are like, that I felt like I meshed with. And it took me so long from having so many bad experiences in high school and like middle school and such to fully trust them. And like, I want people to see Program 38 and know that A, they're not alone if they feel that way, and B, that they don't have to. I mean, I got burned a lot throughout my previous years of life, but then like my other friends proved themselves time and time again to be loyal and good and caring. And like I wanted to show people that feel similarly to me if they exist that like it is possible to find people that care about you. It is possible to find your true family. And even while you're trying to navigate that along the way, you will. I'm promising you, you will get burned a little bit because it's just a way of life. Not everyone is meant to mesh with everyone. But that also doesn't mean, like, I went through a period where I just kind of stuck down and didn't trust anyone. And one or two of my really close friends kind of forced their way in anyway. I hope for everyone else it never gets to that point where they feel like they have to completely, like, sell in on themselves like a turtle and they can just find people. And I want Program 38 to serve as a reminder for that. And I hope through Program 38, people that feel alone can find each other on the internet or maybe even in real life one day if it becomes big enough. So I'm hoping that it can be a connector to people that feel like that, both mentally and emotionally and physically, that they can find each other.
Yeah, and another thing that I think you did well in the book is um, you actually gave tangible steps for how to deal with a panic attack, which I thought was pretty interesting. In some, in some media, maybe they'll show that a character's having a panic attack or some kind of anxiety event, but then they don't necessarily always focus on how do they get, down from that or how do they recover from that. And I think that's kind of like a maybe it's not a, here's a guide or 10 tips to how to, reduce your anxiety kind of book. But I think it's an important thing that, even if someone like me, I've read it, if I get into a situation like that, I can think back of like, oh, actually, this character did this. I haven't tried that, but maybe I should. And I think that's a really interesting, and maybe that was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but something that stood out to me.
As someone that struggled with anxiety and panic attacks over the course of their life, I felt like panic attacks and anxiety in media are being portrayed better than they were. The example that's coming to my mind right now is Hollow Mind and the Owl House. But I also realize that in a lot of those situations where they like show that on screen, it's usually like a cutaway scene. Like you see the character in the Owl House panicking, he runs out the door, but then we never find out how like he managed to come down from that. And like he's still very much traumatized from what happened, but like we don't see how he managed to get himself out of that state. And I felt like as someone who's gone through it, it's very important. Like Kelsey helps Nicole through it, and then one of the characters helps Kelsey later. And there's also another thing that I felt like was important to mention is that characters going through anxiety, there's no one method that works for everyone. Like if someone tells me to do the breathing technique, I'm gonna laugh at them. Just breathing doesn't center me, but like visualization and things like that really will. So like Jay telling Kelsey to visualize all the good moments that she had with her friends when she's having her big panic attack at the end of the book was like coming from a real place. Like I had one of those big bombastic panic attacks in a similar way, and it took like my friend like literally just reminding me of all the good things I had and all the things I enjoyed and all the things I cherished to really come down from that. And I felt like it was important to depict that because like panic attacks and just mental health in general, because Kelsey suffers from CPTSD, is like very taboo. And I feel like it's never portrayed well enough in media. Like Kelsey has a post-traumatic stress disorder. She is going to be more prone to these anxiety and panic attacks than most other people will. And to the annoyance of some of her characters that are her friends, they have to figure out new ways to try and navigate those situations as they occur.
I appreciate the authenticity of the book. And I think I said that before, but um, you definitely get that feeling from reading the book. So if people if people want to read an authentic book, this is a good book for that. You will feel things, you will experience things, um, and like you said, like sometimes someone's approach to a thing isn't exactly what a person needs in that situation, and you deal with that. But then you also show the flip side of that there are ways to recover from some of the struggles that these characters have. So definitely
Like you're
props to you.
like an example being, please don't lie to me. I need you to tell me the truth right now. This is very important. Proceeds to continue lying. Yeah, not a recommendation. If someone is like, I need you to tell me the truth. I got that. Nah, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna tell you the truth. I'm gonna keep going on my lie. I've already like this lie is too big and too dramatic. I'm not gonna tell you now. Yeah, so a lot of the what I also really like about this book is that a lot of the characters fail a lot. Like, it's not something we see often in media where the characters will just constantly succeed or like it'll be like a fake out fail. Like, Kelsey fails. She gets into a fight with a character, she ends up hitting them far too hard and puts them in the hospital for months. She fails. She ends up not knowing how to control her powers. She ends up hurting one of her friends, literally. She fails. She has one opportunity to save one of her friends from a pretty disastrous situation, and he's like, "Don't lie to me, this is important," and she fails because she can't be bothered to tell them the truth, and it's just, she just keeps failing. She has to keep failing to succeed, and she ultimately does, but she does fail, and I feel like that's not something a lot of media does. Like, a lot of the time the protagonist is impervious to really growing. They're usually helping the other characters grow into themselves, whereas Program 38 really kind of subverts that and is like, no, literally every other character has to play some sort of part in helping Kelsey grow rather than it be the other way around for a change because, Kelsey's messed up and like Wyatt has to teach her how to do calculus and like teach her how to like trust people that don't seem particularly trustworthy. And Jay has to teach her how to like get close to people and be friendly with people. And Nicole has to teach her how to treat people in different backgrounds. And Emily has to teach her how to deal with conflict. So like it's more like that than just like, oh, there's this big supervillain and like every other character's having a problem, but not Kelsey, not macho woman Kelsey. I feel like when people ask for strongly written female characters, and we are so used to those being independent, tough people, that it's just it was nice to write Kelsey be able to deviate from that. She is strong, and she does have her moments of independence, but she's also not like a cardboard cutout. She messes up, and badly. So I felt like that was an important added.
Indeed. Yeah, and I guess on the flip side, so we have the character failures. You yourself have been having a number of successes, in my opinion,
Thank you.
having several interviews, having the release book. Let's talk about what's next. So you've got the book out, you've done the interviews, you went to, what was it, the Big Apple New York Comic Con,
Yeah,
if I'm naming that
it's
correctly?
Big
Uh,
Apple Comic Con.
Big Apple Comic Con, thank you, which is also pretty cool. What's next for you in this book and potentially future other works?
So the first thing is that I have a couple more signings being lined up as we speak. I am confirmed to do a signing at Comics on the Green in Scranton, Pennsylvania on December 7th. I have one at a bookstore in New Haven. The name is eluding me right now on January 18th of 2025. And I have I Heart Horror in New Jersey on February 1st. That one's actually like supporting it's like a charity event more than it is a actual signing. Like you have to pay to get in, but some of the proceeds go to, I completely blanking on what charity. I think it's leukemia, but it's like a really wonderful cause. So I was super glad they asked me to get on board. I'm planning a couple more in between there. I have to reach out to a couple people in that regard. So there's that. I am working on the next book to get it out to you guys as quickly as humanly possible, and I'm super excited to do that. I'm working on marketing this book just in general, besides, getting to meet me in person, which would be super cool. I'm trying to get more signings in a further realm. Yeah, I have one in the works for Massachusetts. I'm trying to get in touch with a book convention in Ohio. I can't fly on a plane, so I can't go too far from where I am, but like I'm trying to get things situated there. As far as like other things go, I am going to start querying the Book of Viceroy soon. It looks like that's going to go very well because I've already had someone really big express interest in that particular book, so that would be great if it worked out. Then it's like marketing and coasting from there. Like at this point right now, as I work on getting the second book ready for you guys to enjoy, it's going to be about building the fandom, finding more people to enjoy this with me. And like I'm not just writing this for me, I'm writing for this for you guys to enjoy with me as well. So like a lot of it's gonna be like oriented on what other people want. So like if you guys like want a signing in a specific place or like want me to do something specific with my stuff that I haven't yet, just reach out to me. I'm very open with things like that. Don't reach out to me, please. I've gotten all of my. I get so excited because like I'll get a DM from a new person and they'll be like, "I want to sell your book for $350," and I'll be like, no.
No.
But like seriously, if you have like a genuine inquiry or like something you think would be cool, I mean, I've been working pretty closely with the Horror Connection and Chris recently, and like I've been trying to like get more stuff done and out there. Like there's even talks about an audiobook, but right now we're kind of like in between two studios potentially having it, like working on it. It's just more about figuring out how to fund that because that's going to be a pretty big project. So basically, what happens with this book is in the hands of the universe and you guys watching it. So if you like what you hear, you think I'm cool, you think Glenn's cool, you think the book is cool, please support the book in any way you can. Even if you can't buy it, share it, like my posts, just try to help out. That's really going to determine the future of the book because like if book one flops and doesn't make its money back, I can't really do much else for program 38, at least as it stands right now. So buy the book, guys.
Yeah, definitely worth a read. If people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best place to find? Like, is it on social media, or what's the recommended way to find out more about you and what's going on with you?
So most of my platforms are under the same username of Amanda_M_author. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky that way. You can find me on Facebook by looking up Amanda Madison. I should be one of the first things that pops up. There is also a program_38_series, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook. The program 38 series account on Facebook, at least, is a little bit more for like release dates and signings and so on and so forth. And on Threads and Instagram, it's a little bit more of a goofier thing about like the school and the environment and what the students are going through. I haven't been posting on that again as much as I should, but yeah, the easiest way to reach out to me is on social media. If like my email is needed, you should probably just reach out to me on Instagram first. So yeah, you could also find my information on my website. It's amanda-m-author.com, I think. So you can find all my information there. I have all my links listed there. You can go buy the book there. You can buy it off Amazon there. And my email's there as well. So if you need to email me, I'm not as keen on email, but yeah, social media is recommended. Email, the thing with me and email, funny story is that like my brain will only really process an email like if I do it on my computer. So like I will look at an email on my iPad, and if I can't respond to it like really immediately without like giving a lot of thought to it, I will just put it off for days, as you know, unfortunately. So like I like people keep emailing me like I want to do a podcast with you, like I want to have you on my thing, and I'm like, and then they ask me a bunch of questions, and then I'm like, okay, I'll look at that when I get back on my laptop, and then 4 days later I'll be like, I never signed that piece of paper Glenn needed me to sign. God. So yeah, the sincerely the easiest way to reach me would be social media because I am not as good at checking my email. But yes, I'm open to basically anything that isn't a scam. Instagram is probably the best way to reach me, Amanda_M_author, although the DMs are open on Blue Sky as well. So yeah, reach out to me if you have questions. Like, even if you want to ask me at the book, just reach out to me. Like, I'll answer questions about the book. I'll do podcasts. I'll do signings. I'll do whatever. Throw it at me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking time to talk to me today. Again, the book is Program 38 Sparks with this nice little cover here. Anything else that you want to say in closing before we wrap it up today?
No, I just wanted to make sure I thank you for having me on because this has been a wonderful experience. I'm really glad to get to talk to your audience, and I am super blessed and grateful that you reached out to me with this idea. I had a great time. I enjoy talking about my book. I enjoy talking to you. So thank you so much for having me. I hope we can
Yeah,
do this again
definitely.
sometime.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'll be looking for when the next book comes out. Maybe we can have another chat.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, I'll talk to you later, and thanks everybody for joining in.